Right now, Hurricane Lee is rapidly intensifying in the Atlantic Ocean and it's headed straight towards the East Coast. At the same time, another storm system is forming over the central US, and it's going to try to push Hurricane Lee out to sea. But will it actually be able to do that as Hurricane Lee makes a run at Category 5 strength? And what's going to happen here on land during all this? In this video, we're going to go over everything so you can stay ahead of the storm. So this is what Hurricane Lee looks like right now. As I'm filming this, it's way out here in the Atlantic Ocean, not really bothering anyone, with sustained winds around 80 miles per hour. And of course, while editing this, it strengthened significantly and we're already up to a Category 2 storm with 105 mile per hour winds. And I think that very fast strengthening process is going to continue, because just look at all the activity around the center of the storm. These are huge thunderstorms that are wrapping around the central area of low pressure. These storms are so strong they are actually causing the average sustained winds to increase by around 35 miles per hour every 24 hours or so. This is what we call rapid intensification, and that's going to continue to happen for quite some time as the storm goes to the north of the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico. In fact, the National Hurricane Center's projected track right now is pretty much a straight line paralleling the Caribbean islands. But from there, we're really not sure exactly what's going to happen next. I mean, at first glance, it looks like this is just going to keep on trucking and intensifying on its approach to the US. But there's something going on here that this map is not telling you. Sure, it's possible that this storm could go on unimpeded, but there are several reasons to believe that it could also curve way out to sea. There's a million things that could happen beyond this point, and it would be easy to focus on the worst case and most scary scenario, but I want to make sure you have all the information. So let's focus on what we do know and then revisit the future trajectory. And what we do know is that this thing is about to literally blow up. Hurricane Lee will likely become the strongest hurricane of the year thus far, and I'm pretty confident nothing else will even come close. In fact, the National Hurricane Center is projecting that this thing's going to be a monster Category 4 storm with winds around 155 miles per hour as early as 2 p.m. Saturday. And there's nothing stopping this thing from getting even stronger than that. I mean, the environment out here is primed for hurricane growth. Of course, we have our very high sea surface temperatures, which kind of act like jet fuel for hurricanes. On top of that, we have very little to no wind shear out here. So it looks like Hurricane Lee is going to be able to do whatever it wants for quite some time. But there's going to come a point where Hurricane Lee will start to interact with some outside forces that will either try and weaken it or significantly change its path. You see, there's a storm system forming right now in the central US that may be our saving grace. A dip in the jet stream, or trough, will spark several rounds of showers and thunderstorms across the central and eastern US over the next week. And that trough is actually going to attract Hurricane Lee towards it. Right around the time Hurricane Lee would be making its journey directly towards a US coastline, this trough is going to be trying to exit the US to the northeast. And hurricanes are always trying to find the most efficient way to remove heat and energy from the oceans. It's kind of like their job, and troughs actually provide a quick and easy pathway to exhaust that heat up towards the North Pole. This means that Hurricane Lee is going to try to latch onto the trough and then hopefully get flung way out to sea on its ascent to the North Pole. But this storm is just a little too close for comfort, and we're too far out from this thing to really make definitive decisions based on a couple model runs. The smallest change in the system right now could be the difference between a 100 or 500 mile track change tomorrow. I have a pretty good idea of how I think this is going to go, but it's all dependent on how this storm system behaves over the central US this weekend. So let's really dive in and dissect that system so we have a full understanding of it and how it's going to affect our weather over the weekend, and then that's going to help us discern what might happen with Hurricane Lee as we go forward. And we're going to do all that right after we get properly hydrated with today's sponsor, Liquid IV, fueling life's adventures. If you've watched even a couple of my videos, you probably know by now that I love Liquid IV. It's a major game changer because it hydrates you faster than water alone and has 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink. And it's like way more fun than drinking just water. It actually tastes good, and each packet is loaded with essential vitamins, including B vitamins. This summer, I've been obsessed with the lemon lime variant. I've been drinking it every day, and I think that I've been more energized because of it, and I think my forecasts have been more accurate because of it. If you've never listened to any of my recommendations before, just trust me on this one. And you can get it right now before we even finish this video. I've got a link for you right at the top of the description below. And don't forget to use my exclusive discount code at checkout that's going to save you 20% plus free shipping. So go ahead and click that link and get you some Liquid IV today. And I promise y'all, you will never go back to just regular water. There's no point anymore. You can have fun with your hydration. And now that we're properly lubricated, let's drive forward into this video. So once again, this this big trough ejecting through the U.S. next week will decide what happens with Hurricane Lee. But that trough is going to be doing way more than just steering a hurricane. It's going to be producing a lot of weather across the U.S. as well. Starting as soon as tomorrow, we're going to have a chance of severe thunderstorms across the East Coast as a cold front exits. This is expected to be a hail and wind threat. The tornado threat is very low, but storms are going to pop up during the heating of the day, specifically between Baltimore and Boston, and then just fizzle out or move out to sea by sundown. Pretty much the same exact thing is expected down here along the tail end of the front, as another little disturbance is going to cause some storms in Texas and Oklahoma. But after that, our trough starts digging deeper and a new area of colder air is introduced into the central U.S. This is going to spark another area of showers and thunderstorms in the central U.S. on Saturday. And these storms are also going to be strong, but the main event with this system is going to be the potential relief that's going to come along with it. Watch how as we go from Saturday into Sunday, a huge area of colder than average air takes place over the majority of the central U.S. Some of these areas from Texas up through the Central Plains have been dealing with relentless heat and drought conditions, and it looks like this might be finally a real break from that. Some much needed rainfall will be welcomed from Wyoming all the way down into the Red River Valley next week, and this pattern is going to stay in place for a while. The Climate Prediction Center is even calling for much cooler than average temperatures across the majority of the U.S. in their latest 10-day outlook. But every single bit of this is caused by that dip in the jet stream that we've been talking about. And this is the very dip or trough that Hurricane Lee is going to try and latch onto. And that brings us to my map of what I think could happen with the path of Hurricane Lee. We're going to have three different possible scenarios, starting with the worst case scenario where our trough is either lagged too far to the west or it's a little bit less amplified up to the north. This would still draw in Hurricane Lee. It would still be attracted to it, but instead of flinging it out to sea, it would encourage Hurricane Lee to be drawn up towards the east coast. Currently, most of the forecast models think this is out of the question, since our trough is expected to be progressive enough to push the storm farther east than this. However, it's no secret to you or anybody else that weather people are wrong all the time, and forecast models are wrong most of the time. In fact, we had a very similar situation with Hurricane Florence back in 2018, where we originally thought we would have a fish storm, but over time the forecast changed and we ended up seeing a hurricane make landfall in the Carolinas. So it's important to understand that this is at least still a possibility, although in my opinion it's currently the least likely scenario. Now, a path that this storm could take that's more likely but still not most likely is the exact opposite situation. If the trough ends up being bigger or more progressive and farther east, it's very possible that Hurricane Lee will recurve sooner rather than later and get flung way out to sea. This would be a worst case scenario for Bermuda, but it would keep the impacts pretty low across the eastern US. Okay, so let's get to the most likely scenario. According to all the data we have right now, it's going to be right smack dab in the middle of the first two. A moderately progressive trough will push Hurricane Lee away from the US, but it's going to allow it to come close enough to potentially cause major problems along the way. This is pretty much what the Euro model is showing right now, as Hurricane Lee makes a hard turn to the north as soon as Wednesday of next week, and then it races up the Atlantic. This is also what our spaghetti models are showing, which is just a culmination of a bunch of different model simulations all put together. Notice how there are some straggly little pieces of spaghetti over here, and there's a couple little strands over here, but the majority of our outcomes are centered right here along the most likely path. Now, the good news is Hurricane Lee will not, I repeat, not be a Category 5 once it interacts with land if it takes this path. In fact, it may not be a hurricane at all. As soon as our trough starts interacting with the hurricane and starts moving it around, some upper level wind shear will start to deteriorate the storm's strength, and it will probably start to weaken significantly. And I've got to be careful here talking about words like weaker and weaken significantly and stuff like that. Guys, this could be just as impactful as a major hurricane landfall down south. I'm sure we all remember Hurricane Sandy and what that was like for the folks in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic regions. And that wasn't even a hurricane or a tropical storm. It was a post-tropical cyclone. But it's very important to remember that we are still very far out from this storm having any impacts whatsoever here in the States. And forecast errors, especially with tropical systems, are off the charts whenever you're talking about data that's more than 4 to 5 days out. If we do get a direct landfall or any direct impacts at all here in the US from Hurricane Lee, it won't be until next weekend or sometime between September 14th and 17th. So it's very possible that in just a couple of days we're going to be looking at some different outcomes here. But with a storm like this churning in the Atlantic, everyone with interests along the East Coast from Florida up to Maine should be keeping a very close eye on the forecast changes. One way to do that is by subscribing to this channel. Just click the little button down there, hit the like button, and turn notifications on, because if we do get a hurricane in the States, if we get a landfall anywhere in the States, we are going to go live just like we did for Hurricane Idalia. So subscribe, turn notifications on so you don't miss that, and of course, I will see you in our next update. Goodbye.